Hello? Hello. Hello,
How are you?
Judge. You're on. Good. Had another conversation with Sue. She was glad to hear we got it connected this morning.
Me too. I was freaking out a little bit, but I'm really glad it was unwarranted.
Exactly. Well, I've got a little bit of setup to do. I'm going. There you go. Okay. So we have 24 participants. All right. And I'm just going to wait. It's straight up 11:45, I think, according to my phone. So I'm just going to wait another minute and then I'll start in. I want to try to keep us on time because I know both of you have things that are probably very pressing for you. And so we appreciate your time, taking time to be with us today.
This is definitely an honor. So thank you.
And an honor for us as well. Let's see, we've got 26, yeah. Okay. And Libby, it looks like they're doing both the chat and the Q&A. So
I see that.
Okay.
No problem.
I am going to mention in these introductory things about the webinar, I'm going to ask them to use the chat instead of the Q&A, but we may still get some. Okay, I am going to, I think people are tuning in, maybe another minute. Thank you, Libby. That's good. Okay. How does that screen look, Katheryn? That looks pretty good to me. I don't know if I can. Okay. All right, I think we're good to go. And I'm muted. Hello, and welcome to Women's Equality Day webinar. I'm Katheryn Oler, President of the League of Women Voters of Corpus Christi area. Before we begin today's program, I want to go over the webinar format with you. Think of webinars like a virtual lecture hall or auditorium. There are specific roles for the people involved. There's a host, panelist, or audience. Today's webinar has a host. We like to call her our flight director, Anel Neal. She controls the technical side of things, opening, closing, and everything in between. Next, there are the panelists, the ones who will be speaking and seen during the webinar. And finally, there is the audience. All of you who have joined us on this day to celebrate women's right to vote. Because all of you are filling our virtual auditorium, the webinar format means that you will neither see yourself or other audience members, nor will you be able to speak during the webinar. As limiting as this may seem, we want to make sure that our panelists and other audience members are not distracted by the sea of faces on the screen or by inadvertent background sounds. You may, however, post questions for our panelists in the chat. And because of the number of individuals who are in our auditorium, we cannot guarantee that every question will be addressed. This webinar is being streamed live on our Facebook page and on our YouTube channel. If you have family or friends who want to attend this webinar, there is still time for you to share. I'm sorry. If you have family or friends who want to attend this webinar,
You've muted for a minute, Katheryn.
Katheryn, we can't hear you.
Katheryn, I think you're muted. Libby, can you send her a message?
Sure. Try that.
Katheryn. Oh, shoot. Can you hear us, Katheryn? There you go. We still can't hear you, Katheryn.
So Anel,
Yes.
with your permission, may I move forward while Katheryn works on the technology issue?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay,
There goes
There-
Katheryn.
how's that?
Okay.
My apologies. I think it's because my phone rang and it went to my phone rather than to my computer. So did you hear anything of the introduction? Do I need to repeat any of that? If you would let me know.
We ended, we lost you just
Yes,
after you,
no?
we lost you just after you were telling people that they would not be seen on the screen.
Hang on.
And we
Okay.
seem to be having trouble with people joining via Facebook Live, which I'll try to correct.
okay. I apologize for that. Do I need to repeat this? Did you hear any of it or did it?
We heard some of it. We missed probably the last 30 to 45 seconds of what you were saying.
About the chat and going to the chat and not
Yeah.
being able to hear? Okay.
Uh-oh.
Okay, we have lost Katheryn again. So I'm going to move forward because I think what Katheryn was going to tell you is because this is a webinar, you won't be able to see the chat questions, but we as the hosts and panelists can see them, and I will be able to see your questions as I talk to Judge Klein. So please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll keep track of them there and we'll sprinkle them into the discussion that we are about to have. Thank you for bearing with us with these technical issues. It wouldn't be a proper Zoom meeting without a few issues. The judge and I were talking about that earlier. I'm from home, so you might hear a couple of dogs in the background as we have this conversation, and so I'm sure you will forgive me for that. I am, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Libby Averyt. I am the CEO at United Way of the Coastal Bend. And also in this capacity, I'm host of a show on KEDT called South Texas Leaders, which is why I think the league reached out to me today, because instead of just having the judge have to sit here for 30 minutes and talk nonstop, we decided that a conversation might be a little bit more comfortable and entertaining, frankly, for all of us, which is why they asked me to sort of lead a conversation with her, which I'm more than happy to do. I'm going to give you just a little bit of her credentials, which many of you know, but I don't want to steal all of her thunder and also be able to ask some questions to shed a little bit more light on this. I'm going to talk to her extensively about her background, but just know that She is a respected jurist here in Nueces County. I think you all know that. She was admitted to the Texas bar in 2007 and served as an assistant district attorney in our local district attorney's office as a prosecutor. She also served as a municipal court judge, and then in 2017 was elected to the 214th District Court in a race that I remember pretty well, as I know she does, and a few people told her it wasn't her time, and she proved them wrong. Good for her. She serves as our local administrative judge and also oversees our felony domestic violence court, which was certainly a priority of hers during the election and something that was much needed in our community. So with that, I'm just going to kind of start in the conversation, Judge, if that's okay with you. Many people know that you originally are from Russia, and I just want to start there with your background, what life was like for you as a child, maybe a little bit about your family and how you ended up in the United States.
Sure. First of all, thank you to the League for having me appear here today and for allowing me to introduce myself. Libby, it's truly an honor to have you asking all the questions and facilitating this. Definitely makes it much easier to answer questions than just kind of a free speaking format. Good morning, everybody. I think it's still morning. I am Ina Klein. I'm one of the district court judges. And while I was the local administrative judge for Nueces County, I'm just going to put it out there that Judge Stith is now carrying the torch. And it's actually very difficult, very time-consuming responsibility. So I'm very grateful to him for taking it over. I came to this country when I was almost 14 years old from Moscow, Russia. My parents were scientists, PhDs in chemistry and geophysics. And in 91, my 2-year-old brother, my parents and I came to the United States. So it was a long process of navigating different obstacles in order to come here and in order to make sure that everything was done properly, correctly, legally. I was not aware, obviously, at that age of everything that had to be done. What I do know is when we came here, my parents were looking for jobs, and my job for the first 6 months was watching my 2-year-old brother. So we came with 2 suitcases, $200. I spoke absolutely no English. I was almost fluent in German at the time, but didn't speak a word of English. And so I learned how to speak English by watching soap operas and watching my 2-year-old brother. And then starting high school in the suburbs of Philadelphia in 91. And then going from there to my parents moved to Rhode Island. So everything is in the Northeast until I moved to Texas. And graduated from high school in 94, went to college at Brandeis University, just outside of Boston, graduated with a degree in science because that's what you do in my family. And then kind of contradicting to what my parents suggested that I do, which is, to go into graduate school in science, went to law school. So that was the beginning of my years in the United States.
Well, so may I ask, because we all know teenage years are difficult regardless of such a life transition as you described. How do you think that affected you as a teenager, and how were you able to kind of navigate through that? I suspect your parents were quite helpful in that process.
So I think a process of immigration definitely matures you faster than being a teenager in, I don't know if the word normal exists, but under more typical circumstances. I think I had much less typical friends interaction at the time with people my age, and more in terms of, it was survival. Parents had to work. I had to be responsible for certain tasks, including watching and babysitting my brother, and just doing stuff around the house so that they could work more. I knew that education is key to any further success. So there was always a lot of emphasis on education and success, and basically, failure was not an option. The question was, what was it going to take to get from point A to point B?
So education, I'm sure there was never a question that you were going to go to college. Did your parents make that clear?
Absolutely. So I got to tell you, so when we came here, it was just my mother and my brother and I who came, and my father was already gone from Moscow. We had to separate, but there were 2 suitcases, and one of them was everything for the family, and the other suitcase was books. So that kind of explains the value and emphasis on books and education and what's important.
And so as much as you're comfortable, can you describe for us, I'm sure most of us on this call have never even been to any part of Russia, what life was like for you as a child growing up in Russia?
Sure. So I left in 91. And just to give you a little bit of history, 91 is when the old Soviet Union was falling apart. It was a couple of years after the Berlin Wall was gone in Germany. So things were changing dramatically. It was also probably the most poverty-stricken Soviet Union that existed. So communism is falling apart, but nothing else is in place. And I was in a family of 2 Jewish scientists, and a lot of the people would ask me, well, how did people know you were Jewish? Jewish in Russia was not a religion, it was a nationality. And the irony of all of this is I was never referred to as Russian until I came to the United States. So in Russia, I was Jewish. In the US, I became Russian. So in Russia, when I started school in kindergarten, the teachers' logs, the teachers' journals would have the name of the student, the gender, and then the nationality. And so most of them would say Russian, except next to my name was Jewish. So the fact that I was different was very obvious from the very beginning. And again, it's all about perspective, right? So here I'm known as the pale-skinned girl, right? In Russia, I was the dark-skinned girl. So everything is perspective. There was no religion. Communism and religion are, on the opposite ends of the spectrum. So Jewish always referred to as the nationality, and Jewish was different. And there was definitely a lot of emphasis on you're not like us. And we're going to make sure that you're not like us.
Wow. And I should have said this at the beginning before we started our conversation, because I know that Katheryn would have said it, but yes, we are here obviously on Women's Equality Day, celebrating the ratification of the 19th Amendment, and hopefully continued progression to women's equality, not just from your background in Russia, but I'm curious over your lifetime, both there and once you immigrated to the United States, just sort of what your perception has been about women's equality, not just in the legal community, but certainly there, because we've made some strides there too.
So when I was starting my education, it was in the field of science. And there were definitely disproportionate amounts of male to female students in the science departments, especially based on what kind of science it was, right? So physics department would have many, many more males than females. Once I started going towards the legal studies, there was much more equality as far as in the numbers in law school. However, if you take, for example, my mother as an example, she is a polymer chemist. And when she was starting her career here in this country, I remember her telling me that in Rhode Island, in the company that she was working for, she was the only female polymer chemist. And what that meant was that there were no female restrooms in the building where she was working. So she had to go to use the restroom into a different building. And when she brought it up, it didn't seem to faze anybody. So just in terms of making strides, I think we definitely stand on the shoulders of the women, and not necessarily women, but the icons who are fighting for the equal rights of women. We stand on their shoulders in order to move forward. So absolutely.
It reminds me of the movie Hidden Figures, where that exact story was portrayed, right, of not having a restaurant in the building. So in growing up with a mother who was so well educated and obviously wanting a career, were you aware when you were growing up that your mom was facing these challenges, or how did she communicate that with you?
Absolutely. Very open channels of communication. And she always spoke about it very, as a matter of fact, this is what it is, and I'm going to try to change it, but I don't know if it's going to work. She always talked about how she had to work harder to just be treated the same. And that was both for the gender and for being Jewish. So, I never knew, what percentage was attributed to what issue. So that was just a part of growing up.
And did your parents speak English when they immigrated?
So they both spoke English. They spoke the British English.
Sure.
But it still took a lot of time to kind of acclimate to the American English and to learn it further, because their English was taught by people who probably have never been in an English-speaking country.
Sure.
So very unique experience.
Right. And they both were able to find jobs then here in the United
Correct.
States. Yeah.
Yes.
Good. And so initially, like you mentioned, there was a thought that you might pursue a science. Is that correct?
At least a thought on their side. Yes.
At least they thought that.
Yes.
At what point, though, did you think, well, maybe not, maybe I'll go my own way and do something?
I think the point of where I was looking for the most verbal science to major in was my clue. I definitely skipped that gene when they were giving the genes out by God or whomever. So it was very obvious to me. My parents were hoping that, I would discover it eventually. But yeah, it was pretty obvious to me that I had to find my own way.
And so in high school, when you were then thinking about, what to do in college, did you know at that point that you were interested in a legal career?
I've always been interested in a legal field. I didn't know how it would happen or how I would utilize it. In fact, when I started law school, I thought I would be going towards health field, maybe health law, maybe some kind of trademarks or patent law. And then in my first year of law school, one of my professors just kind of took me under his wing, and he was a criminal law professor. And I always say that criminal law is kind of like a roller coaster. And once you get onto that roller coaster, it's really hard to get off it. So it's a virus that infects you and never quite leaves.
Before I get too far away from your parents' part of this as well, we did have a question in the Q&A more about your mom and what her opportunities were like in Russia before you all moved. A woman of her caliber and certainly her intelligence and professionalism, did she have opportunities in Russia as a working woman?
So she worked always. Since I remember, in fact, she was working on her PhD, I think right after I was born. And she always worked in her field, in the, whether it was more academia related or more industry. But yes, she always worked. Now, whether she worked at the jobs that were maybe not as fit for what she actually wanted to do, maybe, but the bottom line is she was always able to find something within her field.
Sure.
And she's still working. She moved to Corpus right before COVID started, the first wave. And she kind of retired several years ago, but then became an independent consultant in her field and was traveling all around the world up until COVID hit. And she's still working just by Zoom and remotely.
Oh, good for her. Good for her. Is your father still alive?
He is, and he hasn't discovered Texas yet. So he's still in the Northeast. And yes.
So in college, talk to us a little bit about, what you, and again, whatever you're comfortable with. I'm not trying to dig for anything scandalous, but what you did for fun growing up. I'm sure it wasn't just about academics, but maybe it was. But what kinds of things did you do in your spare time as well?
In college?
Sure.
So college was interesting because that was kind of the first time that I was not, kind of the daughter of the immigrants or the immigrant or, taking care of my brothers. So it was really discovering the US for the first time on my own. And I went to a very strong liberal arts school just outside of Boston. So the resources that were available to find out what the US was about, it was fascinating. It was also in Boston, so it's very close to New York City on one side, but also to Canada on the other side. So definitely a very unique, awesome place to go to school.
Oh, I bet that sounds wonderful. And a chance, like you said, where you didn't have as many responsibilities at home.
Right.
Really, really responsible for yourself. And then at what point in college did you know you wanted to attend law school?
So I had finished all of my science requirements when I was in my third year of college. And then there was just the requirement of getting more credits. So I really could take anything. So I started taking law classes and just completely jumped into that world of policy and law and separation of powers. And just, I can tell you for a fact that I was never as fascinated with my studies in science as I was with anything law related.
And were your parents supportive of you going to law school once they got over
They
the
were.
shock?
I think they were hoping that I would straighten out and do something more productive than going into law. But I think eventually it was pretty obvious.
Right. I think you proved to them that you had a successful career.
I'm hopeful.
Yeah, I think so. And so law school, you mentioned the criminal law professor. Once that connection kind of happened, did you know that criminal law was sort of the area that you wanted to focus upon?
I think so. So that happened during first year. Also during the first year, I became a naturalized citizen. So the first year of law school was kind of a critical year in my life. In fact, I had to reschedule one of my final exams in law school in order to be able to go to the swearing-in ceremony to become a citizen. And I became a citizen standing in the middle of the Faneuil Hall in the middle of Boston, which is an absolutely surreal experience, standing where the whole American history kind of happened, and becoming a citizen and just standing in the middle of, a crowd of people that were doing the same. And I think the best analogy is to an adoption ceremony that I do now for, kids or grownups that get adopted by, a set of parents or one parent. So definitely very, very emotional. But that was during the first year, and criminal law kind of never left. I became an intern with the public defender's office, and then I got involved with the Innocence Project. So in one role or another, I had always been involved from that point on with criminal law.
Well, it sounds like too that you were drawn to the ways that the law can help people, right, who may be underrepresented or underserved.
Absolutely.
What do you think drew you to that role?
I think it's the process. It's the actual process, not the outcome, not the actual verdict. It's the fact that there are rights. And, it's nice to reach the right verdict, whether it's guilt or innocence. But the fact that our Constitution sets the parameters and there are constitutional rights and you must follow them. And if you don't, then there are ramifications. To me, emotionally, cerebrally, on every level is such an important concept.
Mm-hmm. And I'm struck by your story of the naturalization ceremony too, because for many of us, we're just born into this country and take it for granted, right? And there's a question in the chat that I think follows that in talking about voting. While we have 66% of registered Texans voted in the 2020 election. Honestly, that's a higher number than we know vote in a lot of other elections. Certainly off presidential years, the turnout can be really, really low. What ideas do you might have to encourage better voter participation?
So I think we need to really target the young population, and they will do what their parents do. They don't really listen to what we tell them. They do what they see us do. So my daughter is almost 18 years old, and one of her things that she looks most forward to is she'll be voting for the first time in the 22 election. My son is 21 and he's voted since he became 18. I think it's just critical to have those conversations, to take them to the voting places with you when you go. I think when I talk to my kids about voting, I'm really not interested in who they vote for. I'm not interested in whether they're left or right or center. It's the fact that they educate themselves. It's the fact that they're not just sitting by and watching the politics walk by. It's the fact that they're taking ownership of their community, of their surroundings, that they understand that it's going to be all in their hands in just a few years. And unless they take ownership, well, the bottom line is they can't complain about what's happening on local or national level unless they get involved. That's the bottom line.
That's right. That's right. So I'm going to go back to your personal story a little bit. How on earth did you get to Texas?
So my daughter's father was a physician, and he was always interested in moving to Texas. And so he found a job in Texas in Corpus with one of the physician's practices. And we came here, and my daughter was 1 at the time. So she really doesn't remember anything from outside of Texas. And it's funny because she says, well, I was born in Providence, Rhode Island, and so I can take the cold. And when we went skiing in New Hampshire, she and I both were so pathetic because my ability to tolerate the heat hasn't quite developed, but boy, did my ability to tolerate the cold has left the house. So yeah, that's how we ended up in Texas.
Sure. And so was the job with the district attorney's office here your first professional job out of law school?
No. So I worked out of law school in a civil law firm in Rhode Island. And then I also worked just independently when my daughter was just born. But the district attorney's office was my first job in Texas. And in order to get it, I had to take the bar exam all over again, because I know you will find it shocking, but Texas doesn't recognize anything north of Virginia or DC or, that line.
Right. We need a national bar exam at some point, Judge.
That sure would be nice.
As the mother of a daughter who's in law school right now, that would be very nice.
And I've been following along on your daughter's journey, and it sounds so interesting, so fascinating.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Well, not to get off on my kids, but we've got some questions coming across the chat, and I'd like to hear more about this too. You mentioned the Innocence Project, and the question is whether your experience there with the Innocence Project, did that shape your attitude toward the death penalty? And could you share your opinion on that with us?
So, I think that prepared me really well for my job later as an assistant district attorney, and also later as a district judge, because I think you have to be really well-rounded and see every side of it to truly be neutral. So the years working for the public defender's office and kind of working under the supervision of people like Barry Scheck, it definitely gives you one perspective. And then having spent 6 years at the district attorney's office and seeing the other side, I think it placed me exactly in the middle of that spectrum, which is what I need right now.
Right. As a judge, I mean, you've got to be right in the middle there. That's an incredible history, frankly, and experience that you were able to work on completely both sides of those issues that you now have to judge in your current
Just
capacity.
Absolutely very lucky. And the funny thing is, when I was in law school, most of my classmates were talking about how one day they really wanted to pursue a judicial bench. And I think I was, if not the only one, then definitely in the minority of the kids who just had absolutely zero interest in that. And so doing it now is definitely an honor and a privilege.
There's another question from the audience that I think relates to what we're discussing as well. You talked about the experiences that you had as a child, being referred to as Jewish in Russia and feeling that sort of otherness, if you will. And certainly we have our own, in America, we have our own examples of otherness that are not always positive, certainly, and taken as opportunities to discriminate against people. What, I guess, would be your experience locally, particularly, I think, as a judge or a prosecutor? Are you seeing examples of where we as Americans still, kind of use that as an excuse when people are not like us to discriminate against people, particularly people of color? Have you seen examples of that in your work?
I think we see it every day. The question is, are we really looking? The implicit versus explicit bias, it is an everyday thing. And, just like I said, one day I am the dark-skinned girl and the next day I am the light-skinned girl, definitely gives me a unique perspective to see this. I definitely feel still that people look at me and, I've had defendants who would say, well, I don't want to be judged by somebody who has an accent, or somebody who is a female, or somebody who is white, or somebody, we do this whether explicitly or implicitly. So catching yourself doing this is the trick, being aware and educating yourself on the differences among the people in your community, and not just your community, but the outside world is, I think, critical, because I think if we look deeply inside ourselves, we'll catch at least implicit biases.
Right. Well, that's the key, though, is to get us to all look deeply within ourselves, which is not always the most comfortable thing for folks to do, right?
Absolutely. But I think unless that conversation happens, we don't progress.
Right. That's true. So you're at the district attorney's office. as a prosecutor, like you said, after having worked as a public defender in some roles. And then my recollection is then you went on to be the municipal court judge. Is that correct?
That's right.
And so what was that experience like? Two totally different areas of the law.
So again, very surreal. So I went from prosecuting. By that time, I was one of the most experienced prosecutors in the office. So I was prosecuting some very violent, serious offenses, capital murders, and crimes against people. And a position became open with the municipal court. And I had asked somebody about it, and somebody mentioned, well, it's a very political office. And I said, okay, well, so much for that, because I don't know. And I'm very embarrassed, but I didn't even know all the city council people who were there at the time. I didn't know who would be interviewing me. I didn't quite know where the municipal court was. So I Googled that. I MapQuested where the municipal court was, and I went to the interview. And I think I was really lucky that at least that day, the committee that was interviewing was looking for somebody who was just interested in the job and not in the politics. And so I was able to get that job. And one of the responsibilities of that job was the juvenile caseload. And so I was assigned to it. And I remember my first case was a young man who was charged with a curfew ordinance violation. And I literally went from capital murders to a curfew ordinance violation. I didn't know we had a curfew ordinance in Corpus. And so I didn't know what to ask him. He's standing in front of me. He's without a lawyer. He's with his mom. And so the only question I could ask was, well, why did you violate the curfew ordinance? And he looked at me and he said, well, because it's rude to smoke at your mom's house. And I thought, well, that's pretty polite, so I started placing him on conditions, and everything was going well until I told him that he'd have to be home by 7 o'clock in the evening. And he got very anxious. And so he started asking me if it applied to the weekends. And I said, well, yes, the weekends too. And so he asked, well, how is he going to be able to see his baby if he has to be home by 7? And so, to make a long story short, he explained to me that his girlfriend was pregnant and they were about to have a baby. And I remember thinking, I was just so overwhelmed by the issues I was now dealing with that I had never dealt before, and how I was going to be able to help with those issues. I was so not equipped. And so in fact, I called the person who was in charge of the committee, the hiring committee that day. I said, you may have made a mistake. I may not be qualified for that. And I remember her telling me, well, if you're having these doubts, then I think we made just the right decision, because you're thinking about it and you are uncomfortable and you're trying to reach outside of your comfort zone. So the 3.5 years that I spent at municipal court definitely prepared me for the unprepared status of this job now, and made me used to constantly stepping outside of the comfort zone.
It strikes me that I think the best judges, and not that I'm any expert by any means, but the best judges that I have seen over my lifetime here, and I was the courts reporter for a while when I worked at the paper, are those who bring their humanity with them to the bench. And while you do sit in judgment, that doesn't mean that you have to be condemning of people, right? Or their choices or their life circumstances. And I think that's what you're describing, is that, because you are human and you felt that uncomfortableness, right?
Absolutely.
Sure.
I think the day I don't feel uncomfortable should be the day that I step down and look for something else to do.
Right. Yeah, no, so well said. And I do want to get a little bit to your decision to run for the district court, because many of you may remember that we had a longtime incumbent who was there, and Judge Klein took on that race when some people advised her against it. Why did you decide to do that and to risk that, honestly?
So I didn't do it lightly, and I tried to convince everybody else to do it instead, and nobody would do it. I think my family was getting tired of me complaining about the problem that I saw in this court, and about the temperament, and about the way people were being treated, and the way cases ran. So finally, I kind of I think I didn't have an option. So I started. Now I'm going to tell you that I had no idea how challenging, exhausting, every word in the book, that process would be. And I don't know if I would have taken it on had I known it. But once I did take it, failure was not an option. So I don't think I've ever worked as hard on something as I did during those 17 months of campaigning.
Right. And you won with more than, it was 54% of the vote, something. It was
About that.
Yeah, it was, you certainly won without a runoff or anything. And
I mean, I can tell you that the day of the election, so the initial results came in, I think about 7:30 in the evening, maybe 8 o'clock. And I was at home, it was raining that day. And so we stopped by the house to change afterwards. And the initial results came in, but we know that the results can flip, with the mail-in ballots and with everything else. So we went to the courthouse, and I absolutely refused to leave the courthouse until I think it was about 2 o'clock in the morning when the final results came in. And so, yeah. And at that point, I remember turning to my husband and saying, "So do you think I'm going to like this job?" And the look that he had on his face was just, "Do you think it's a little late for that?" But I can tell you that, during the 17 months, I never allowed myself to look to the finish line. It had to be in the moment, because that was the only way I could handle it.
Sure.
It had to be today and tomorrow,
Right.
Not past that.
Right. And one of I remember, in fact, you come into the editorial board, and one of the promises you made was to take domestic violence very seriously. And you have done so in overseeing the domestic violence felony court. One of the questions in the chat is, do you feel like that we're making any progress in educating folks about domestic violence and hopefully combating it?
I think absolutely. I never believed it would be a problem that could be solved in a year or 2 or even 10. But I think once you bring that conversation to the front burner, once you acknowledge that it's a huge problem, and it's a problem in every zip code, in every county, in every jurisdiction, and we have to do something about it. And education is huge. Just like the voting issue, it will change with our young people. It will probably not change with us. The same will be with domestic violence, unless it's the conversation that's being handled with the young people. We're not going to change it. So it's difficult now with COVID and with the way schools are handling everything. But until COVID, one of the big things that we were doing was going into the schools, into junior high schools, middle schools, and just having conversations, not about cases specifically, just about what it is and what it looks like. And the bottom line is that there are so many people that don't know what domestic violence looks like. That, it's not just physical, it doesn't usually start physical. It starts on emotional level. It starts on financial level, verbal level, and then it just progresses.
So I want to let our audience know that I am I need to wrap up before too long. And so get those questions in if you have any last minute questions. And I want to ask, you've mentioned COVID a couple of times, and we could take a whole nother hour, right, to talk about that. But everybody has, I think, their COVID stories, if you will. And my personal question is more about, as a mother, as a wife, as a professional woman, what you have done to to help yourself get through this last 15 months or so. You know, all of our lives have changed in various ways. And it's whether you know somebody directly who may have died from COVID or, you know, been ill. I think we all have had our own struggles through this time. And so what have you done to help take care of yourself personally to get through this challenging time?
I think for me and for my family, it has been trying to maintain as much of normal as possible. So whether it's, you know, if working out is your routine, you know, you may not be able to go to the gym, but maybe it's the half an hour or 40 minutes of a nature walk, you know, every day. Maybe it's cooking, maybe it's, you know, reading something, maybe it's forming a virtual book club instead of, you know, the book club that you used to have. You know, there's so much alienation, physical alienation that's happening since COVID, that to preserve our mental health, we have to put in some kind of checks and balances, even it's on a virtual level. You know, some of my friends are doing wine club, you know, on Zoom, you know, whatever works for you. Mental health is such a huge thing on a good day, but on a COVID day, gosh, you know, it's, you know, I've been trying to check in with as many people that I would normally maybe not text and say, hey, how are you doing? I think just a smile, and, you know, smiling is a big thing, because I think it's so nice to see smiles, but with the masks, we don't see the smiles. Mm-hmm. So I've actually found myself, you know, even if I send a text, I try to make sure that I send some kind of an emoji that's that has a smiley face, or on Zoom with a smiley face. I think it's critical. I think right now, just reaching out to our neighbor or to a friend that you don't usually reach out to make sure they're okay is absolutely critical.
That's all really good suggestions. And I think that this will probably be our last question. It seems applicable since it is Women's Equality Day, and there has been some publicity in the past several years about the number of female judges, certainly that we have in Nueces County, and we have made good strides there, particularly in the last 10 to 15 years or so. Do you feel like that Nueces County is a little bit more progressive in that area in terms of making sure that there is more representation on the bench? And then also I would add to that, you know, what advice you would give young women who may be interested in leadership positions, whether they be in the law or other professions.
So yes, I do think that Nueces County is definitely on a good path to the equality in our field. I'm very excited to have female colleagues on the bench. I think it would be a very difficult place, more difficult if I were to be the only female, you know. So I'm definitely very fortunate in that aspect. Now, as far as maybe girls who are thinking about going into this field and thinking self-conscious, well, you know, maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I should be a secretary, or, you know, just something that's not all the way. You know, I always say, you know, you got to reach for the stars, and education is what's going to get you there, no matter where you are now. So again, us, the female leaders, going out and talking to those girls that are maybe sitting in the back of the classroom because they're too shy to sit in the front of the classroom, and calling on them and coming up to them, you know, just showing the just interest in them and being kind to them and inviting them to come and maybe shadow us in the courtroom. Right now, all the judges are live streaming. We're supposed to satisfy the open court requirement by live streaming our hearings. So I love to tell people, hey, you know, join in, you know, just go into YouTube, watch your judges working. And then, of course, hopefully one day when we move back into the actual courtroom, come watch. You know, it's fascinating. The energy of the courthouse is undescribable unless you go there and you feel it. you know, that I think it's the same as criminal law for me. It's that virus that takes over and you don't want to leave.
Well, and maybe in the future, we can all continue to watch remotely, you know, at some point. This has shown us that even when we go back into the courtroom,
Absolutely.
maybe
I think, you know, we've made such a leap into technology that we had to take. So to go back would be such a shame. I think there is a definite place to stay for Zoom and for YouTube. It will just be nice to have the option of doing either.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I know that I've gone a little bit over time. I think Katheryn will probably forgive me for that. Thank you so much, Judge Klein. There have been several comments in the chat just thanking you for your leadership, for being such a wonderful role model for so many people, not just young women. And we so appreciate just your time and openness with us today.
It's my absolute pleasure and honor to be able to talk to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Katheryn, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Klein and Libby. Judge Klein, we appreciate the stories that you've shared with us today. You know, it is about telling our stories that gets us connected. And so that's really important to us as a league and as individuals and women. And Libby, as always, you saved the day. I appreciate you so much. From my my techie role did not work out very well today, but we do so much appreciate your gift of conversation. It creates such a setting for meaningful and an open exchange of thoughts and ideas. And so thank you very, very much. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Corpus Christi, we will be sending both of you suffragette sashes and a banner and a pin to commemorate this very historic day. So Godspeed and best wishes to you both. We do need to thank people, some of our donors who purchased tickets for our original event that was scheduled to be in person. The committee made a very, we think, cautionary decision to revamp this meeting to a virtual from an in-person. We scrambled with about 2 weeks in order to get that done. And so we appreciate everyone who was able to accommodate that. We have to thank, in the league, the Women's Equality Day Committee for acting that decisively and making this recommendation. I particularly want to thank Lois Huff. She's a former League of Women Voters Corpus Christi president, and she was chair of this committee, who unfortunately, along with her husband, are dealing with breakthrough COVID. So I would please remember both of them in your thoughts and prayers that they come through this very, very well. Thank you also to the other committee members, Chris Davis Garcia, Sandra Heatherly, Anil Neal, Ann Stewart, Sylvia Whitworth, and Sue Williams. They all changed gears to make this switch as smoothly as absolutely possible. We also thank County Judge Barbara Canales and the Commissioner's Court, as well as Mayor Paulette Guajardo and the City Council for the proclamations designating this as Women's Equality Day in Nueces County and in Corpus Christi. That's very, very meaningful. It's because of the bravery, tenacity, and insight, like both of you, of the women who came before us and who live amongst us now and who will come after us. The 19th Amendment, ratified on this day in 1920, now and forevermore secured and protects a woman's right to vote. However, there's still work to be done. The Equal Rights Amendment is a proposed amendment to the United States Constitution designed to guarantee equal legal rights for all American citizens, regardless of sex. It seeks to end the legal distinctions between men and women in terms of divorce, property, employment, and other matters. To date, only 38 states have ratified the federal amendment. Texas is one of those states. They signed on just like they did for the 19th Amendment. Texas was the 8th state to ratify the amendment on March the 30th, 1972. On November the 7th, 1972, Texas ratified its own Equal Rights Amendment. And that particular constitutional election is really close to my heart because it was the first time that I, as an 18-year-old, could vote. And what a memorable moment in my young life. Many of you may recall that that amendment was championed by Corpus Christi's own Sissy Farenthold. So amazing women, an amazing time. For this 117th U.S. Congress convened for the first time in January of this year, and resolutions with bipartisan support were introduced to remove the time limit placed upon the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment in 1972. The House of Representatives has voted in favor of this. They passed House Joint Resolution 17. The Senate Joint Resolution 1 is now in the U.S. Senate, and it needs to be moved to the floor for a vote. The League of Women Voters, along with many other organizations, has worked long and hard to bring this amendment to fruition. So on this day, this very special day, Women's Equality Day, I urge all of you to contact Senator Cornyn and Senator Cruz to vote for this important guarantee of full equal rights for women in the United States. There is no time limit on equality. And we hope that our next Women's Equality Day observance next year will celebrate the passage of the Equal Rights Amendment. Want to thank you for commemorating us, helping us commemorate today's important milestone. We thank all of the sponsors, the donors who worked with us in this change of venue, and we appreciate their support and their continuing support by doing that. So now, again, this important milestone, it's a fundamental right of a democracy, the right to vote. The right to have access to vote without impediment, and the right to have our votes counted. So thank all of you. Thank you again, Libby. Thank you again, Judge Klein. Thank you, our flight director, Anel, for making this happen. And thank all of you members and guests who've participated. Again, this has been recorded, and you will find this on our website and also on our Facebook page if you were not able to attend and want to share that with others. So Godspeed to all of you. I think we're ending a tad bit early, but I think that's okay. Excuse me, Anel.
I would like to make one announcement. We had one of the attendees request direction on how to join the League of Women Voters. If you go to your web provider and put in League of Women Voters Corpus Christi, it will bring up several. The actual website is LWV-CC.org. Is that it, Katheryn?
Yes.
Yes, LWV-CC.org. And there are on the link that you used, if you went to our website today, LWV, Lois is correcting me, LWV-CC.org. And if you would like to have any of the items that we're sending to Ms. Averyt and Judge Klein, those are available on our website. At present, they are on the link that we shared for today's meeting. And since our annual fundraiser, this was our annual fundraiser, and that is the only real fundraising income we have for this year, that is going to be a primary source of income for us. You can click on it and pay by PayPal. So if anyone would like one of those, please click on that link, click on what you would like to have, or maybe you would like to buy one for a friend. There is either a window, you can either be a window flag or a door flag, or you can put it in your yard. And there is the sash like Katheryn is wearing, and there is a League of Women Voters pin, which you can use to connect the sash so that it wears properly. That is all I have, other than to say add my personal thanks to joining us today, and to Judge Klein and Miss Averyt. Really, really nice interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Anel, for bringing that up. Just really quickly, a few announcements. Sadly, tomorrow at 11:30 a.m. at St. Pius Catholic Church, Sandra Heatherly, longtime member, her husband passed away a couple of weeks ago, and services are going to be held there tomorrow morning at 11:30. Also, there's going to be a mapping workshop this Saturday at 2 p.m. on redistricting on the 28th. If you'd like to attend, please get in touch with Julie Rogers, our Vice President of Program. Also in September, our membership meeting, Kiwana Denson is going to be doing a presentation on her work, her advocacy work, in order to get legislation with respect to safety on our beaches due to riptide. It's a fascinating story. It's full of grit, and I think that you will appreciate and learn much from Kiwana. I'd also like to say that the October 21st meeting, it would be Scott Cross from the Nueces County Director of Coastal Parks. And again, this is relating to safety on beaches, but also to one of our prior position statements that we need to revisit and see if it needs updating or any changes. Also, again, housework. The year of the league ends at the end of May. And so that means June 1, the new membership year starts. And so at this time, if you have not renewed, we would appreciate your renewals. Again, those can be done on our website. Again, that helps us reach out and stay in contact with you. I'd also like to say that already up on our Facebook page are videos from the League of Women Voters Texas, one each for the constitutional amendments that will be on the ballot this November for the constitutional election. So those you can begin to look at, and there will be a voter's guide on that from the state so that people can educate themselves and have make informed decisions. That being said, we are done for this day. Again, many thanks to all of you who made this possible. It's not an easy task sometimes, but we appreciate everyone's effort in doing this. Again, I cannot thank our two guests enough. This was an amazing conversation, and I know many of us probably had goosebumps in hearing the stories that you told today. So thank you, thank you, thank you. So until next time. We'll see you then. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.